Hi, I'm Hal. Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about all the books that I ended up reading in the month of May. I ended up reading 7 books in total. That was 3 physical books, 1 ebook and 3 audiobooks. And then in terms of how I got those books, one of those books is a book that I already owned. 2 of those books I got from the library, and then 4 of those books I got through Libby, or like an online library system. So the first book that I ended up reading this month was The Buffalo Hunter Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. This is like a historical horror novel. I did pick this up as a physical book from my library, but I've had to give it back because of the fact that someone else had requested it afterwards, and I currently have too many loans, reservations, stuff going on at the library, so I don't want them to do anything with my account. So yeah, this is like a historical horror novel. It's presented kind of as a story within a story within a story almost. We start off the story and we end the story. Kind of our framing narrative is a modern day woman called Etsy. She recently, a journal belonging to her like great-great-great-grandfather has been found within a construction site, and she's kind of been given this book to, or at least the like transcribed version of this journal to kind of look through in terms of doing like research and stuff like that. I believe she's a professor and she's trying to get tenure and stuff like that. And then we also get the transcribed kind of journal from this guy. He's a Lutheran pastor in like 1912 in America. Very much like frontier townsy is what I would say. And when we start kind of following his narrative, there's been a series of weird murders that have occurred kind of throughout town, and he is also writing down the kind of a series of conversations / confessions that he's having with a local Blackfoot man who goes by various names, but mostly Good Stab, throughout the course of this novel, who is kind of telling Arthur, our like Lutheran pastor guy, his life story and kind of how he has become a vampire. And kind of interspersed between like these little sections of like Good Stab story, we get the, Arthur continuing to talk about kind of his life and what's going on there. But yeah, it's a very slow moving, it's very historical, it's very slow moving, it's a lot of like, words on a page in a very real way. I did really like a lot of the thoughts that went into this. I really liked how vampirism is done and discussed in this novel. It takes that like you are what you eat idea kind of to the very extremes that it could go in ways that are like cruel and gross. And it also means that like to remain who you are, you have to hurt your own people in a way that I think is a really good like thing that should be true about vampirism, like there is no easy way out of this. He, Gustav tries other ways, but to remain who he is, he has to prey on his own people, which I think is really interesting. I liked obviously, like I mentioned, it's very historical. There's a lot, I was having a lot of thoughts about language throughout this like book. Obviously we're getting everything transcribed through like Arthur, so I was always having thoughts about like, is he, is this being transcribed faithfully? Are we getting the whole story and what these people have written down? Are we getting the whole story and what these people are choosing to say? And one of the things that I think is really interesting in regards to language in this novel is that like when Good Stab is like telling his story, he is using a lot of Blackfoot words for like animal names and things like that. But then in the in between conversations that he's having with Arthur outside of like him telling his story for like that chapter, he often uses the like English like names for these. And I think that's like obviously a conscious decision that he's making within his storytelling, and I thought that was like really interesting and like has implications and things like that. But yeah, unfortunately in terms of it as a book, I really was struggling with it. It was one of those situations where like as soon as I picked it up and I read the book, I was having a good time. I thought that this was well written, it was interesting. Like I mentioned, I was having a lot of thoughts like surrounding this book, which I thought were really cool. But I just like I lost the will to like want to pick this book up at all. I was really like not interested, and I really struggled my way through it in that regard. Like as soon as I picked it up, it was fine. I could read through it. And yeah, maybe it took me a little bit longer to get through my like 65 pages a day because it's a bit denser, but like I was having a good time. I just like did not care to pick this up, and that was a real issue. And I don't know if that's like because of the book itself, if because of like the pace of this book and the fact that it's very dense and historical, like that wasn't like working for me. Was it because it was at the end of having read another like quite a few very long books, and I was just getting tired? I don't know, but overall it meant that I had like a worse experience of this book that I wanted to have, basically. So yeah, I've ended up giving this 3 stars. I think it's a good book. It just like didn't work for me in this specific way, but I genuinely think it could be like a me issue. We'll also say it is very slow. I didn't feel like there was much happening until the very end of this book, which did work and it did tie everything together, but like, yeah, you are wading through a lot for a very long time. The next book that I ended up picking up was Looking for Group by Alexis Hall. This is a contemporary gay romance novel. The main conceit of this book is that our main characters are involved in playing the same like online MMORPG or massively multiplayer online role-playing game. In a very like World of Warcraft, you know, type situation. We're following our main character Drew, who is 19 years old. He's at university. He is studying game design, and he's like, yeah, I'm like interested. I like play this like MMORPG, but I also like hang out with people and like play board games, and you know, I'm a respectable type of nerd kind of thing. So yeah, at the beginning of this book, Drew ends up having a big falling out with his previous guild on Heroes of Legend, which is the MMORPG in this book, and ends up joining a new guild, which is a lot like chiller and kind of more casual and also a lot more diverse than his previous guild. And doing so, he ends up meeting Solace, who is another one of the like players in this book. That's their character name, and they start like hanging out, obviously, whilst they're all like raiding together as a guild, but also like a bit more one-on-one, and they start to like develop this little bit of a relationship until kind of we find out that Solace isn't a girl, as Drew was expecting, but that they're also living in the same city, and they're like the same age. They're both at university, like they're both 19-year-olds at university, and kind of things kind of develop from there. Drew obviously has a little bit of like a sexuality crisis, but like, yeah, they start like dating and hanging out in real life, and kind of things go from there. This was really, really fun. So I believe this book was like originally self-published in 2018 and then has been republished in 2025, and I don't know if it's because of like the MMORPG setting is quite specific to like that period of time. It's a bit more of a niche thing. I obviously know some about MMORPGs. I never got too deeply into an MMORPG that like had like a guild and like raiding setups, but like I did know some of the things that were going on in this book. But because of that, there's obviously like at the beginning of the book there's like a glossary, and then there are almost like 60 pages like of author notes and annotations throughout the book, which are from like explaining like niche details about the like type of game that they're playing, to just like the author commenting on what was written, and things like that, kind of explaining a bit about the setting and things. We are like very much in like, this is very English in like the late 2010s. They go for a date at Pizza Express and talk about the dough balls, you know, it's very British in that kind of way. And I think that both of those things, the fact that you can tell that, you know, Alexis Hall really cares and likes this type of book, like this game, and is putting that like that enthusiasm for this into the book that he's writing really, really works for me every time that I read something and I learn a bit about the thing that it's about, because you can tell that the author is enthusiastic about that topic. Always really works for me. I thought that the third act conflict breakup was really well telegraphed, and worked very well and made sense with how these characters were set up in this world. And I thought that the makeup thing was done was really cute and really again made sense within the context of this world. This is a very cute very first relationship at university in that kind of way. And I really liked both of these characters. I thought that they were really fun. I definitely was more on Kit, who is the other main character's side in terms of the big discussion that they have. But I thought that was interesting as well, to be in a main character's head whose point of view I don't really agree with. But yeah, the main thing that didn't work for me in this story is that the ending is really, really abrupt. And I get it, and I think it's funny in a way, in terms of how it ends and what this story is about. But I do a wrapping up epilogue. I enjoy people living their lives, and this was really, really abrupt in how it ended. But yeah, overall I gave this 4 stars. I thought that this was really fun. It was exactly what I needed after slogging through 3 really long books. It definitely made me really excited to read my book every single day. Is it revolutionary? No, but it really, really charms me, and it was really fun, and it was exactly what I needed to pick up at that moment in time, and I had a great time. The next book that I ended up finishing was A Fire Endless by Rebecca Ross. This is the sequel to A River Enchanted, which I read last month. It's a fantasy book where we're on this island called Cadence. We're following our main character Jack, who had been away to the mainland for several years at university learning how, studying music, and in the first book, he gets called back to the island by his laird for some reason, and he gets there and he realised that it was actually the laird's daughter, a woman named Adira, who was his childhood rival that wrote this letter to bring him back because several young girls on this island have gone missing, and she needs his help as a bard to talk to the spirits of the the elements, kind of to work out what's going on. And things kind of get a bit more complicated from there. We're obviously exploring more of this world. The island is split in 2. There are 2 different clans on either side, and an ongoing conflict there. We are in a very Celtic inspired world, and we're kind of adding on to that. With this book, we're kind of following on directly from the events of the previous book and where we kind of left things, but there's also a new threat kind of going on. There's a blight which is affecting the crops and agriculture as well as the people as well. So we follow a whole cast of characters. Jack is just kind of our main one, as they're kind of dealing with the consequences of the previous book as well as this new threat. And yeah, we get a lot more of the spirits and fae kind of aspect to this book, which I really enjoyed. I really liked how everything kind of wrapped up and some of the kind of conflicts and the storylines that were going on in this book. I definitely enjoyed this one more than the first one. I think that this worked better for me, but at the end of the day, I'm still giving it 3 stars. I think it's really good. I think it's very well put together, but it just didn't super connect with me or do anything revolutionary in my opinion. I think it's lovely, but it's good, The next book that I ended up picking up was another audiobook, was The Gentle Art of Fortune Hunting by KJ Charles. This is a Regency historical gay romance novel. We're following our 2 main characters, Robin and Marianne Loxley, who have come to London to kind of, make connections, and for Marianne to go on her season. And then you find out very quickly that they are not who they are presenting themselves as. They are here to hunt for their fortunes. Marianne kind of sets her sight on a marquis to, become a marchioness and have a whole bunch of money, and Robin goes after like a younger heiress to obviously marry her and try and get her money that way. And things kind of start falling apart when the woman who Robin is trying to pursue, her uncle, a man called John Hart, becomes very suspicious about Robin and is like, I think that he's a fortune hunter and is trying to kind of firstly like find out more information. Did he already know that I can't remember her name, which is really bad because she's a really fun character. If like he knew about his like niece's fortune. Robin plays a lot of cards and he's like, I think he's also cheating at cards. And that kind of leads to, they have these very antagonistic meetings up until the point that they get into a situation which then leads to them sleeping together. I'm not gonna go into the details of why, but yeah, they start sleeping together, they start spending more time together, maybe finding out a bit more about why, you know, they are in the situations that they are, why they have the opinions that they do, and maybe even falling in love. In the same way that when I read the previous book by KJ Charles that I read, I knew exactly what was happening because I had been told the plot of the entire book by my friend who enjoys reading KJ Charles. I was in the same situation here. I went into this fully knowing like what the setup was, what the story was, you know, what was going on. I think he reached out, he was like, if I say the names Marianne and Robin Locksley of Nottingham, what do you think? And I was like, I don't know what you're trying to tell me. And he was like, they're from Robin Hood. And I was like, okay. Crucial like thought that I was having the entire time reading this book. But yeah, like, I don't think I like this one as much as the previous KJ Charles book that I read. I think because these characters were a lot more antagonistic towards each other at various parts in this book, which like makes sense for who they are and the situation that they're in and the like class difference that's going on, which I all think is done and like managed very well, and you know, we end up with an ending that is realistic considering the conditions of the time, whilst also being like a pretty happy ending for everyone involved. But yeah, you know, there were moments in this where I was like, you are being quite mean to each other, which again, I think is, you know, would be accurate as to how these characters would like interact with each other based on the information that they know, but it doesn't mean that I have to enjoy it. Overall, I gave this 3 stars as well. I had a good time. It was an audiobook to pass the time with. Yeah, really fun. The next book that I ended up reading was Kushiel's Avatar by Jacqueline Carey. This is the third and kind of technically final book in this series. There is also a retelling of the first one, but from Jocelyn's perspective, which I will probably be picking up and reading at some point soon. But yeah, these are like historical, like fantasy, a little bit of romance books. They're set in like a historical way. I would explain the historical setting by saying they're historical in the same way that a Renaissance fair is historical. We have, you know, it's very much based on our real world, and a lot of the countries are like placed in different eras of time is what I would say. There's some places that are very clearly like, you know, Renaissance, and some of them which are a bit more fuzzy about the time period. We're following our main character Phaedra. In this world we have a little bit of a different like religious setup. It plays with the idea of what if like when Jesus was on the cross, the blood of Jesus, X, the tears of Mary Magdalene, X, the earth, created a new guy called Elua, and for a period of time he goes round with his series of companions, which are angels that have decided to follow him, and they end up founding this country called Terre d'Ange, which is kind of where France is, and then they kind of go off into like an afterlife, leaving behind this religious setup with these houses where there are people who serve various of these companions in various different ways. Phaedra gets brought up within this like house court system to begin with, and then gets adopted by a guy called Delaunay who continues her training, and she ends up being this like courtesan spiral. She's something called a servant to Nama, who like is one of these companions who is involved with like courtesans. But Phaedra is also something in this world called Kushiel's dart, which means that she has a red dot in her eye. She's, chosen by Kushiel, who is like the companion that's associated with like forgiveness through pain. She is God's perfect little masochist, is basically the long and short of it. So in the first book, we follow her growing up within this system and kind of getting involved in the political kind of machinations that are going on in this world. Book 2 kind of obviously led on from that in terms of some of the people that she has a relationship with in there. And then in book 3, again, we're kind of following on for the events. This is set 10 years after the events of Kushiel's Chosen. There is a child who is introduced at the kind of in Kushiel's Chosen, who is obviously a baby at that point in time, and he is now 10 years old. And he ends up going missing, and through a series of events, Phaedra is kind of tasked with trying to work out what's going on with this child. And then as well, one of the characters who I've not really mentioned but is introduced in book 1 is a character called Hyacinth. He is like Phaedra's childhood best friend. He is a member of the like Romani analog people in this world, and during the events of book 1 they end up, she's on these various journeys with various characters, and he ends up like sacrificing himself to prevent Phaedra from getting into the kind of situation that he ends up in. And since that point, Phaedra has been trying to find a way to rescue him, and the trying to find this child and trying to work out the solution to Hyacinth's issue end up like joining, and she has to go to the same places to try and find this out. So off we go. We are traveling to various places, new places in this world. Let me show you on the little map in this book. So obviously to begin with, we were just like in Western Europe, and then in book 2 we were also doing some of like Italy and the Illyrian coast and Greece, and in this one we expand further. We're in a couple of countries in Africa, we're in like Egypt, we're in the Middle East, things like that. And yeah, like, this was really fun. We get to some really dark places in this. It was a real like, oh, we're in like, this is the pit of despair. There are parts of this book that like were genuinely like a bit uncomfortable to get through because of like the situation that our characters found themselves in. And then obviously like we get through it, things turn out well, we're back to like having a good romp around places. But like, I think it really worked because it led to a really beautiful relationship between some of our characters. I ended up really, really liking the child character in this. I thought that he was great, and he was really like a great addition to like the cast. Obviously whilst we're in the pit of despair section of this book, there is some like, again, tension between Phaedra and Jacqueline, who is like our male main character, and they're in a relationship, and obviously things get a little bit tense there. But again, I think completely understandably, Phaedra keeps on getting herself into like fuck-ass situations, and Jacqueline is like, I said that I would follow you until the ends of the earth, but god damn it, I wish you weren't taking me there. But yeah, I really, really liked this book. I liked where we ended. I was really emotional near the end of this book because of like how much I care about these characters and this world. I think everything was tied up really nicely, and I just really love this story. I would say that this is on like the same level as how much I enjoyed it as like book 1 in this series. I didn't like book 2 as much, but yeah, I gave this 5 stars. I had an absolutely fantastic time. Something that you probably don't want to hear about, I was doing insane like reading things when I was reading this book, because obviously this is the big tall US trade paperback kind of copy that I have of this, and I normally read 65 pages of a book a day, and especially coming off like having read a lot of books, I was like, what if I like got the like digital copy through my library of the like UK size paperback, use the number of pages that's on Storygraph, which I don't think was accurate because it was like 900 and something pages, which is not the size of the actual physical UK paperback book. This book is like almost 600 pages, and then use the percentage of like pages that I normally read off the digital copy to work out how many chapters I had to read in this book. So it did take me a little bit longer to get through this, but I was also not forcing myself to read more than what I had previously been reading in terms of like page count, if that makes any sense. Everyone I explained this to looked at me like I was insane, and I've got to admit I did feel slightly like that, but that's what I did for reading this book. The next book that I ended up picking up was A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. This is like a cozy sci-fi book, I guess. We're set in like a solar punk kind of future. The world that we're in previously had robots and a lot of like factory stuff. I feel like, you know, very reliant on like fossil fuels. And then at some point in the past, robots ended up getting sentience, and they ended up deciding to leave humanity and go off like into the wilderness. And this was like the inciting incident for kind of humans to kind of get their shit together and become a lot more sustainable, solar punky, and like respect nature a lot more. So we're now in this kind of future where there is more of a balance between humans and nature, and robots are kind of out in the wilderness. Humans are not allowed to kind of get in touch with them, but at some point a robot can kind of get in touch with humans. And we're following our main character Dex, who is a monk to one of the like 6 gods in this world. And at the beginning of this book, they're kind of burnt out and, you know, really want to like go out into nature. And one of the things that they really want to do is hear cricket song. And so they decide to be something that's called a tea monk. These are traveling monks that go out and they like prepare tea for people and listen to their problems and, you know, lend a helping hand or just lend a helping ear kind of thing. And so we follow them as they set out on this journey, as they get better at this, and then after a couple of years, as they, you know, go out into the wilderness and end up meeting a robot who has been sent out by, like, decided by the robot delegation to kind of see how humans are doing and if they need anything. And so we just follow these 2 characters who kind of end up having a bunch of conversations about, like, life and, you know, what your purpose is and things like that as they travel kind of further into the wilderness to try and, you know, on a little journey together. I really liked this. I loved the, like, setup for this world. I thought that was really cool. I liked these characters. I thought they were really fun. I thought that they were having some really cool conversations about, like, nature's place, like, humans' place in, like, nature and, like, what our purpose is and things like that. And just, like, I think it was really cool. It felt like in some places it flipped the dynamic that we often have with like humans being closer to nature and robots being more machine in this really interesting way that led to a lot of like the conversations that Dex and the robot are able to have. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was quite touching in some places. My main issue with this is I read it as an audiobook. I think that the audiobook narrator does a really good job with this. I have no issues with the audiobook narrator like themselves. Every so often you're listening to an audiobook and there's a line that has been re-recorded and it sounds a little bit janky, but you're like, it's fine. There were so many of those lines that it was jarring and it kept on taking me out of this story in a way that like I think was to the detriment of the audiobook, unfortunately. I still really enjoyed it, but I think that kept me from like fully like loving this book, unfortunately. So I've ended up giving this 4 stars, but yeah, I feel like that was a real hang-up. I don't think I would have given this 5 stars even if the audiobook had been perfect, but like it was enough of an issue that like it kept on cropping up and impacting my reading experience. The last book that I ended up reading was The Crack at the Heart of Everything by Fiona Fenn, which I have as a little ebook on my Kindle. This is a gay fantasy romance. We're following our main character Orpheus, who is like a dark wizard. He creates this like purple flame and he's basically like done his job. He's got his Empress Law, like a big giant skeleton man. She has waged war, she's won, she's got her empire, and now she's like settling into her castle when a a bunch of like monsters or hellbeasts start targeting Orpheus and trying to get him killed, and in the progress, you know, affecting people around him. So Orpheus ends up being exiled, and with him ends up going Fenrir, who is like the captain of the army, the god, I don't know. And they have a bit of a contentious relationship in the way that Orpheus is like, this man we hate each other, he is my enemy. He keeps on being really annoying, and then Fenrir is just like continuously trying to flirt with this man in a real way. And you're like, okay, I see what the setup here is. And yeah, we kind of like follow them as they go outside of like the place that Orpheus has like grown up in. We learn a bit more about what's happening in the world. There are these like big chasms that produce the same kind of like purple flame that Orpheus can use. We learn a bit more about like the history, like her backstory and how we got here. What I really enjoyed about this book is that it's a fantasy book in the way of like a far distant future Earth, where like science has happened to the point that it's now magic, if that makes sense. We are very much on Earth. We have references to like old things. The reason that this guy is called Orpheus is because he read a bunch of like Greek poetry and thought that Orpheus was a cool name. There's very much a like, I think some of this is about nuclear war. And I think that that's really fun, and I like piecing together things like that are going on. I like sci-fi books that are secretly actually fantasy. I love fantasy books that are actually secretly sci-fi. I love the blending of the two genres. But other than that, I felt like this book was pretty like average. I felt like the characters were pretty well done. There were a couple of relationships that I thought were really cute and interesting and compelling. But like, overall, this was just kind of okay. I am very much interested in like what this author writes next. I know that this was their first book, and I think that with some time and kind of, you know, other books under their belt, I think that they might write something that is really compelling and really works for me, but this just like didn't quite work. I had a great time reading it, but yeah, I ended up giving this 2 stars, which is my like, it was okay rating. So yeah, that's everything that I read. I do have a couple more like miscellaneous things that I wanted to chat about. Again, you are locked in a room and I want to yap. One of the things that I have been like rereading incredibly slowly has been A Strange and Stubborn Endurance by Foz Meadows. This is like one of my favourite gay fantasy romance books of all time. I read this originally from my library, and then when the second book came out, I ended up buying a copy of the first and the second book because I enjoyed it so much. And I just like wanted to pick it up again, and I'm having a great time reading it. It's like a political, like arranged marriage situation. Anyway, not the point. The point is that I was picking this up because I wanted to reread it. And I was looking at the like, you know, the like quotes, the pull quotes that are on the cover. The pull quote on the cover is by Jacqueline Carey, which I think is hysterical because I did not know who this woman was when I picked up this book for the first time. I didn't even know if there were pull quotes because I read an ebook like through my library. But like, I think that's crazy because I really love her like other work, right? And it makes sense because often these people are like in a similar genre, but like I thought that was so funny. Also on the back, in terms of like people who I hadn't read at the time that I have since read and enjoyed their books, we've got Everina Maxwell of like Winter's Orbit and Ocean's Echo, who I really enjoyed, and like Freya Marks of like A Marvelous Light and like Swordcross, who I also really enjoy their work as well. And I thought that that was so funny and I had to bring it up. That's everything that I read in the month of May. In terms of what I'm reading currently, I'm listening to the audiobook of Some Desperate Glory by Emily Tesh, and I'm reading The Wolf and His King by Finn Longman, I believe. So yeah, I have some interesting books coming up. I think I will be going on a little holiday again with my friends, like I did when I went to Morpeth last year, so I'm hopefully going to be vlogging and reading some fun books through that. But yeah, that's kind of everything. I hope that you've been having a good month. I hope that you've been reading some good books. Bye!